All right, I just need to do a quick scan of the room. And I'm probably seeing, I'd say maybe 50% of the room, maybe a little bit under. Yeah, probably a little bit under. G'day, guys. People who wear glasses. Anybody who's wearing glasses at the moment, just put your hand up. Maybe I'll get you to take them off for me. Can you do that? Some people are worried in doing that. Yeah. Maybe you want to share them with the person beside you because they may need glasses, but they're saying, "Oh no, I'm okay, I'm all right, okay." But you can put them back on. I've mentioned this before. I've been through this journey just in the last probably 3 years of admitting the fact that I need glasses for this distance stuff. I'm okay when I'm up close. I can read all of this. You probably noticed I take my glasses off to read stuff that's there. But from a distance, I struggle. And I put up with it for longer than I should have. I would be driving along and I'd be thinking to myself, does that say 60 or 80? I'm not really sure. Sometimes the police did help me to recognise what that should have been. But I had to get to this point of recognising actually the way that I see things without glasses, I don't see it clearly. And the minute I got these glasses, I went and got checked and they did all of the right things and I put them on and I thought, wow. The world is different. It is so much clearer. Even watching television, there's things on there that I thought, I'd be sitting there squinting like this, and then all of a sudden you put glasses on and you go, wow, I don't need to squint. I don't need to hurt my eyes, and I can see differently. I can see the world with new eyes almost. And as we've been going through this idea of Mission Possible over the last few weeks, we've been thinking about what does it mean for us to live on mission every single week. The first week, 2 weeks back, we looked at the big picture of things. Now, in that idea of the big picture, we looked at the fact that we are missionaries, each and every one of us. Not to be sent to the other side of the world or anything like that. We're missionaries where we are. And a missionary, the definition we had the last couple of weeks, is someone who takes the story of salvation to another person. And as we considered that idea of being missionaries, all of us, regardless of where we are, when we profess faith in Jesus Christ, He has said to us as his disciples, go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them of everything that I've taught you. That's Matthew 28:20. And we looked at that in the very first week, this idea of what does it mean for us to firstly represent God, to be God's people in this world. But then secondly, what does it mean for us to represent God? As we encounter people who may have a very different opinion of who God is or may have been hurt by Christian people, we need to represent this God of love and grace and mercy. So the big picture was we've been called to be missionaries. Last week, Sharon looked at this idea of this gospel foundation, and we looked at the story of Nicodemus, who came to Jesus and said, Jesus, I just need to spend time with you. And Jesus, in talking with Nicodemus, said to him, well, what you actually need is to be born again. You need this new life, this second chance at living. And as Nicodemus came to terms with what that meant, we got to the point in John 3 where we read these very well-known words from John 3:16. And for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. And you know, it's been this week, and for the very first time this week, I've had a new revelation of this very verse. Some of you may have, if you have your own Bibles, when you read through this passage, if you're reading through the Gospels, sometimes the words of Jesus are written in red. So when you open up the Gospels, you can see very clearly what Jesus has said. This is something that Jesus did not say. In John chapter 3, if you look at it, there's all of this interaction between Nicodemus and Jesus, and then Jesus speaks again, and there's a fair bit of red writing in there where Jesus speaks. But it gets to this verse 16, and it's in black. It's not something that Jesus said. This is something that John, who wrote that gospel, came to this new understanding himself. And he was the one who said this. John was a man who recognized who Jesus was, what Jesus did for himself, and then he was able to articulate that in a very simple kind of way. And that's what sharing the gospel message is all about. It's about recognizing who Jesus is, about knowing what he's done in your own life and this transformation that happened, but then being able to articulate it. And John said, actually, I get who Jesus is. And this is the very simple way that I've worked out how to express this. Because God loved the world so much that he actually sent Jesus into the world. And this is John having this gospel foundation. He knew what the gospel message, the good news of Jesus was all about, and he expressed it in a very simple and clear way. So we've looked at the big picture. We've looked at this gospel foundation. But in reality, what does it mean for you and me from here, from today, for every single day? What does it mean for us as we live our everyday life? We get the big picture. We know what the gospel message is, and we're missionaries. Yeah, I understand that. You've said that for the last couple of weeks. And we know that the gospel is important, the fact that Jesus died for my sins. But how do we put that into practice? What does it mean for you and I to be people who live on mission? That this is a mission possible for each one of us. Well, as we read through that passage of Mark chapter 5, you probably thought, how does this all fit in? How does this work into this idea of being on mission? And all I'm going to do today, because there is so much in this passage, is simply look at the beginning and the end. The middle is actually very important. The middle part of this interaction is very important, but we need this sandwich thing to happen. Because if you just have peanut butter on your hand, that's not very exciting. You need the bread, both sides, to make it quite neat and a lot easier to eat, don't you? Okay? So you need the bread for the sandwich. We're going to look at the bread, okay? That's what we need to look at today. And starting off, when we look at this, verse 1, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. This is where this story starts. Now, quite literally, and some translations will actually say this, it says that Jesus and his disciples went to the other side of the lake. They went from Galilee. They were in an area there doing all of this ministry work with a whole lot of people there. They got to a point where Jesus said, hey, let's get in the boat. Let's go across. So they literally went to the other side of the lake. But more than just that literal idea of going to the other side, Jesus and his disciples went to the other side in a very different way. They went to the other side in a cultural way. They went from an area that was, or pretty much everybody was Jewish. They knew what it meant to live the life of a Jewish person, follow the instructions and things like that, the teaching of the rabbis and all of those things. They crossed the lake, Jesus and his disciples, and they entered an area that was a Gentile area. These weren't people who knew anything about the Jewish customs. They lived very different lifestyles. Now, for Sharon and myself, we have spent the majority or all of our married life, apart from the last 4 years, in New South Wales. And when we came here, we crossed the border and we entered a new culture, being in Queensland. There are some very different things that happen in Queensland that don't seem to happen in other places. And there is this very real rivalry between New South Wales and Queensland. You know, there's, especially when it comes to football or sporting competitions, and there's this rivalry between the two. You know, it's always this thing of, well, Queensland are trying to be just as good as what New South Wales are. So there's this rivalry that yes, that's what it is. But literally, when you drive across the state line, a change happens. The very first thing that I noticed going from New South Wales, driving over the state border into Queensland, I don't know whether you've picked this up, the lines on the road. What have you noticed? They change colour. Who said that, Susan? Yeah, they change colour. New South Wales has white and yellow lines. But when you get into Queensland, they're all white. So probably save money on different colour paints and things like that. I don't know. But there's that change. It's just a very simple thing that's different between New South Wales and Queensland. Now, there's language differences that are used as well. I spent a few years as a kid. Number of years I started school in Gympie when my parents lived up there. We went back to New South Wales, came back to Brisbane for a period of time. And one of the things that I realised growing up, when we went swimming, we, from New South Wales, we either put on our swimmers or our cozies. But up here, you put your togs on. I don't know what togs are, but that's what you do. You put your togs on. So, and there was that. When we talk about schooling, there's different ideas of, and I can't remember what, you might be able to help me with this. If you didn't go to school, we used to call it wagging. But do you call it jigging? No, it's wagging? Okay, well, some of New South Wales actually call it whopping. And so you whop school, but you wag school or you jig school. There's these differences in the terminology and the phrases that people use. There's cultural differences literally as you go across a border. And as Jesus and his disciples went from Galilee to the other side, they crossed into this new cultural place. Now, Jesus did this for a very specific purpose. He wasn't frightened about going to the other side. In fact, he knew very specifically, on the other side are people who need to know the freedom that comes through me, through Jesus. They need to experience this new understanding of what religion is all about. And Jesus, in going to the other side, crossed a cultural barrier. For him, being a Jewish man, they would never enter a Gentile area. It was almost an unwritten thing because the Jews thought they're unclean. And if we go into their land, we will become unclean. But Jesus said, I'm not going to let that cultural thing stop me from going to the other side. So for Jesus, this idea of being on mission for him meant that he went to the other side, to places where nobody else would possibly go. The second thing that Jesus did was he intentionally went. It wasn't just by chance that he decided to go to the other side, because he knew that there were people there who needed to hear this message of freedom. And as you go through the story, as you read it, you discover the first encounter is with this man who is bound by an evil spirit. He's literally chained up and knows no freedom of life because this evil spirit has him bound up. And Jesus intentionally goes to this place, again crossing a cultural barrier, going into an area where there was death, into the tombs. This man was unclean, but that didn't stop Jesus. So Jesus went to the other side, and he was intentional about going there. And as Jesus arrived, he actually saw that this man was desperately in need of freedom. Freedom from what had him bound up. I wonder whether for us, when we're thinking about being on mission, do these things really ring true for us? Do we go to the other side? Or are we too frightened to go to the other side because of what we might encounter? Because things might be different from what we've experienced. They might be from a different nationality. They might be from a different faith background. They might be from a different whatever. And there's this fear of going to the other side because what we might encounter may be confronting and we're not sure how to handle it. Are we intentional about what we choose to do, who we choose to spend time with, who we choose to speak with, who we share our life with? Are we intentional in doing that for the very simple reason of, actually, this person needs to know the freedom that comes through knowing Jesus? I wonder whether we actually open our eyes and see the world in a different way. Or are we like this, where we just think, actually, that's how the world is, and I can't see any differently to that. But when we see the world through the eyes of Jesus, we see it very differently. We see it clearly. When we're thinking about living life on mission, do we go to the other side? What am I talking about, the other side? It's not just about going to the other side of the lake, the other side of the world, okay? That's this missionary idea that we're often afraid of. I wonder whether for us, when we're thinking about living life on mission, if we are to go to the other side, maybe the other side is simply the other side of the fence where you live. To that person who lives next door to you. To that person who lives in the unit next door. And I wonder whether we are afraid of doing that because we're not sure what we will encounter. But I wonder, should we be intentional about saying, if I'm a missionary, if I've been called by Jesus to share the message of the Saviour with another person, then the person on the other side, and whether it's the other side of the fence, or the other side of the road, or the other side of the office, or it may literally be the other side of the world, I wonder whether we intentionally go saying, this person needs to hear the message of Jesus and the freedom that comes through a relationship with Jesus. And whether we go with eyes open, God, help me to see what you want me to see. Help me to see this person through your eyes, but help me to see how I can be the hands and feet of Jesus in this place, in this setting, in this relationship as well. The other side may be scary, but when we go to the other side intentionally and with eyes open and saying, God, just show me how I can be a missionary here on the other side, we actually open ourselves up to God's leading in our life. We open ourselves up to allowing God just to show us things that we may never have seen before. You know, these glasses are so important to see clearly. And for us, for you and I who know the message of freedom through Jesus, we need to share that with other people. You know, recently I was talking to somebody about the census data that has been released recently. And for the church in Australia, the church numbers are in serious decline. And we can't be we can't sit back and wait for people to come to us wanting to know about the love of Jesus, because stats are telling us that that is not happening. The church is in decline. And if you look at the numbers more specifically, with numbers for the Salvation Army as a denomination, it is the denomination that has dropped the most. And as the church as a whole, we need to be saying, how are we as God's representatives representing God to this world who desperately needs to know the story of freedom? We need to go to the other side. We need to be intentional, and we need to ask God to open our eyes to what He wants us to see and how He wants us to live. That's verse 1. Jesus and His disciples went to the other side. And you and I are called to go to the other side. There's a whole lot of stuff in the middle that happens, and it's actually really important. It's so important. It's this transformation that happens in the life of this man who is bound by evil spirits. We may never, ever, ever encounter that kind of thing. We may, but there's a good chance that we won't. But one thing that we will encounter when we go to the other side is people who need to know that message that freedom comes through Jesus Christ. And that's the story of this man. That's the story of, as Jesus dealt with him, He released this man from what had bound him. For this man specifically, these evil spirits. But there are so many ways that people are bound up. They are not free. They are searching for freedom in so many areas of life. And for you and I, we have this message that says, Jesus Christ is the answer. Jesus is enough for me. I have decided I'll follow Jesus. No turning back. And this man's story of transformation is so important. And we looked at verse 1. Now we're just going to look at the very last couple of verses in this story. Because this man got to a point where he said, I'm free. Finally, somebody has seen me in a different way. They've seen me for who I really am. They've loved me and accepted me when everybody else in society has pushed me aside. They've pushed me out. I've been an outcast and nobody would let me into the city, let alone come and stand next to me in the place where I live. But finally, this man Jesus has accepted me and He's loved me and He's shown me what it is to experience love. And this man said, I just want to be with you. I don't want to be with anybody else. I want to be with you. You've given me something that nobody else has given me or shown me. So I just want to be with you. And Jesus' response, no, that's not going to happen. You're not coming with me because I have something else in mind for you. If you look at verse 17, this isn't on the screen. If you look at verse 17, we discover that as Jesus dealt with the evil spirits that were in this man, the evil spirits said, "Don't destroy us, cast us into the pigs." So Jesus said, "Okay, all right." And they went into the pigs, and these pigs ran off the edge of the cliff and drowned. And the people who were there go, "No, that's our livelihood. We've lost everything that makes us money in this place." And everybody in that area was starting to get upset and angry at Jesus. Verse 17, the people began to plead with Jesus to leave the region. They didn't want him there. Jesus had destroyed their livelihood. He'd taken away what they were living for. So they didn't want Jesus there. But when this man said, "I want to come with you, Jesus," Jesus said, No, you can't do that. I don't want you to come with me. I want you to go back to your people. You know, these people who don't want me, they don't want me around the place. I want you to go back in amongst them. They know who you are. They know who you were. They will see who you are. And you can tell them who I am. Jesus very intentionally said to this man, "You will be the one who can tell these people about the freedom that comes through what you've experienced from me." Jesus gave this man an instruction. He instructed him to be intentional about sharing his story with people. Very intentionally. Jesus wasn't wanted there, but this man had a story that said, "You know who I was, and look at me now. Look at the change that has happened in my life." And you know why this has happened? Because this man, Jesus, gave me freedom. And this man was now to be intentional. And he would see the people of his own area, his neighbours, with different eyes. He would see them in a new way. Now, let's get very practical here. Let's get very practical. What does it mean for you and I to be able to do this? How can we do this? I wonder whether this could be a challenge for each of us over this coming Christmas period. Christmas is one of those times where there's a lot of excitement around the place, you know, people gathering, things like that, people getting gifts, and there's almost this sharing nature that can come out in people. I wonder whether for you and I, whether we can be intentional during this Christmas period. Being intentional like this, going to the other side, to a place where maybe you haven't been before, whether it's your neighbours, whether it's 2 houses up, you might know your neighbours either side, whether it's a little bit further, whether it's on the other side of the street, whether it's somebody who you regularly see but don't have much to do with, going to the other side intentionally saying, how can I share the love of Jesus and this message of Christmas with this person? What would that look like? Maybe to start off with, it's saying, God, open my eyes. Show me what it means for me to share this message of Christmas, which is a story of freedom, a story of new life. How can I share this with others? Maybe it's quite simply baking something and saying, hey, I'm from 2 houses down. just want to share this with you because I love Christmas and it's a great time of the year, and I just want to give you this to celebrate this season that I love so much. Maybe you could, if you're crafty, you could make some little kind of Christmas ornament or something like that they can hang on their Christmas tree. I don't know, whatever it might happen to look like. But how can we be intentional in, first of all, going to the other side, intentionally starting conversations with that person, with somebody, with eyes open to say, God, show me what the needs are here, and how can I do something? How can I share the love of Jesus with this person? There's a challenge that I want to put out to you. Maybe with your friends, you can spend some time with each other, talking, thinking, but ultimately praying about what this looks like. How can I practically be on mission this Christmas season where everybody is open to this idea of this is a time of sharing, of giving? So how can we give the gift of Jesus this Christmas? Just as we finish now, we're going to spend some time just quite simply singing through the words of this song that say, "Open the eyes of my heart." This is a very real thing that we need to ask God to open our eyes to see the world in a very different way to probably how you see it now. Seeing the world in a way that says there's people that need to know the message of Jesus. And for you, when we sing these songs, I want you to think, what's the other side that I might be called to go to? Where is the other side? How can I be intentional about spending time there? What my conversation will be? Who do I get to know? What's their story, their background, their faith experience? And then saying, God, open my eyes. Help me to see how I can be Jesus, how I can share the message of a Saviour. That may not be the very first conversation that happens. That may be a conversation that is 5, 6, 7 weeks, months away even. But initially, what's the other side? And how can I be intentional? So God, open my eyes. Just as we spend time with these words in reflection, can I encourage you to be thinking through that? God, show me what this looks like. Help me. Open my eyes to how I can be on mission in my everyday life where I am. So just as as Ash leads us through this song, just as we spend time, you might want to sing these words. You might want to spend this time in prayer and saying, God, show me. Open my eyes in a very real way. Maybe you have somebody who you know God is saying, that's the person. And in your heart, you know, that's what I've got to be doing. So how do we do that? So let's just take time to sit, to respond, to reflect, but asking God to open our eyes.
I want to just share one verse from Mark chapter 5. When you go out of this place, God's grace is enough for you. If you have nothing else in the world, you have the greatest gift, God's grace. So go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy and shown grace to you. God bless you.